Hi, I'm Magnus. I used to believe that being the quiet one in the family meant I was safe, until my parents sent a voicemail telling me I was out of the family business. No meeting, no warning, just their voices, cold and rehearsed, like it'd been removed from a mailing list. But that wasn't the worst part. It was what came after. The name I wasn't supposed to see removed from the contract. The loan I never signed, but somehow backed the photo, cracked across my face, mailed with no return address. And then 89 missed calls. What makes a family choose silence over honesty? And when they erase you quietly, do you disappear or do you start writing your own ending? It started at 6:42 in the morning, a time too early for bad news, but apparently just right for betrayal. The snow hadn't stopped falling all night, teeny, slow flakes piling on the ledge outside my kitchen window in Spokane. I hadn't touched my coffee yet. It was still hot, but barely. I remember the way the mug felt in my hand when my phone buzzed once, screen lighting up with a missed call from Homeline and a new voicemail. I didn't think much of it. Maybe Mom reminding me to pick up groceries or some last-minute meeting prep. I tapped play. Her voice came through measured, flat, rehearsed. Hi, we've decided to restructure the company. Effective immediately, you're no longer part of the business. You'll be hearing from our attorney. No good morning, no Magnus, not even a breath of discomfort. That was it. Just that one message. My name wasn't spoken, not even once. The hum of the refrigerator behind me grew louder than the rest of the room. It was as if the walls, the floor, the world knew something had shifted and were politely stepping back to let it happen. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just stood there, holding that cooling mug like it could anchor me to something that wasn't vanishing in real time. I hit replay. Slower, still no mistake, still no warmth, still not even my name. I sat down at the kitchen table, phone on the counter, voicemail still open. The hum of the fridge, the tick of the clock, the stillness they all pressed in. I thought about every late night I spent fixing payroll when no one else even knew it was broken. About the times I refinanced my own condo to cover vendor delays without ever submitting it as a company expense. About the 3 a.m. calls I answered when Dad panicked over line item discrepancies, and the weekends I gave up when Valora was too busy preparing for investor photo shoots. None of that seemed to matter anymore. I had been erased. Efficiently. Quietly. I opened my laptop. There it was. The Q4 annual review deck. I clicked through the slides until I got to the part I knew they wouldn't delete because it was too polished to throw out. My project, my financial model, the risk mitigation strategy I'd worked on during the flu, curled up with tissues and spreadsheets. And there was my face in the background photo, no less. Still cropped just enough to keep me anonymous. Below the slide, bold font, led by Valora Rhodes, Executive Vision. They had taken my work, my image, and stapled her name to it. I didn't shout. I didn't throw the laptop. I simply dragged the corner of the screen, hit screenshot, and saved it to a folder I hadn't touched in years. A folder I created after the first time they forgot to include me in a board decision. The folder was called Just in Case. That night, lying awake, I replayed the voicemail again. The delivery, the finality, the indifference. I remembered being 24, standing on the cold factory floor with shoes too new and a clipboard too full. Valora was in New York then, getting a crash course in branding while I was figuring out how to read vendor contracts and calculate gross margins. They always said she had the look. Apparently, I had the silence. And I wore it well. Over the years, I took on everything they didn't want to handle: procurement, logistics, taxes. They called me the backbone, the numbers girl, the fixer. Funny how the backbone gets removed when the face wants all the credit. I didn't call back. I didn't reply. Instead, I copied the voicemail file to my encrypted drive. Opened QuickBooks from 3 fiscal years ago. Not to fix anything, but to remember the patterns, the timelines, the debt moves, the silent saves. If they wanted to pretend I was never there, I wasn't going to beg to be drawn back in. I was going to document every inch of the ground I stood on, and if they tried to bulldoze it, they'd trip on everything I left buried under their own names. I opened a blank document, titled it Audit 2023-2024, Internal Memo. Then, before typing a single word, I hit play on the voicemail once more. Not to hear the words, but to remember the tone. Because when betrayal comes in pearls and parent tones, you don't scream back. You build silence that costs. I walked in without a badge, and still, no one stopped me. They barely looked up. My heels tapped against the polished floor of the Spokane Convention Center, echoing louder than any of the polite background jazz playing in the ballroom. I moved with the same deliberate confidence I used when negotiating vendor terms, even if my stomach turned knots behind the facade. I hadn't planned to attend the gala. The invitation arrived 2 days prior, no title, no greeting, just Ms. A. Rhodes in generic font, shoved into an unsealed envelope. No mention of the role I played in saving the company from collapse that year. But curiosity has its own gravity. And so, I walked in. Alone. The check-in woman didn't recognize me. She handed me a name tag and gestured toward the banquet layout. I scanned for my table 19. It sat tucked behind a wide decorative column near the back of the room. As I approached, it became unmistakably clear. The table was directly adjacent to the restroom entrance. I could hear toilet flushes and bursts of awkward laughter filtering through each time the door swung open. The seat backs were too close to the service corridor. Every time a server passed by, I felt the vibration in the floor. One of them, a kid maybe 22, leaned down and asked with a smile, "Mom, are you with catering?" I stared at him long enough that he shifted awkwardly and walked off without waiting for an answer. At the front of the room, a spotlight flared to life. Valora appeared on stage, draped in navy satin, hair pinned into an elegant twist. The MC introduced her as the woman behind Vanden's remarkable financial turnaround. I felt the sting long before the applause started. I didn't clap. Not when the screen behind her lit up with slides I had designed. Not when her voice ran over every milestone metric I had calibrated, every forecast had personally refined at 2 a.m. while she was in Miami on brand alignment. She was celebrated as a visionary. I was seated next to the bathroom. That applause didn't sound like praise. It sounded like a door clicking shut. The next morning, I brewed my own coffee at home, stood by the window, while the snow softened the edges of the street. I logged into my bank app out of routine. No deposit. It was February 3rd. Payday. Vandeen had always deposited by 6 a.m., no exception. I waited an hour. Still nothing. I called HR. After 2 reroutes and 1 accidental disconnect, someone finally answered. "We were told finance was consolidating payroll functions," she said hesitantly. "Your profile was marked as inactive." I stood still. "I built that payroll system," I said, more to myself than to her. But she had already moved on to ending the call. I didn't cry. I walked 4 miles home from downtown that evening instead of taking a cab. The cold burned against my cheeks, but I welcomed it. I needed to feel something that wasn't quiet betrayal. In my apartment, I dropped the gala pamphlet on the floor, kicked off my boots, and walked straight to my desk. I pulled up my encrypted drive, opened the folder labeled Contingency. I renamed it Exit Strategy. I took a screenshot of my empty bank history, time-stamped 7:04 a.m., February 3rd. Dragged it into the folder, then added a scanned image of the Table 19 layout from the gala program. I wasn't compiling revenge. I was compiling evidence. Not for them. For me. Because if I ever questioned whether I was overreacting, I needed proof that I wasn't. I needed reminders that I wasn't imagining things. On my nightstand, the name tag from the gala still sat untouched. I picked it up, stared at the cheap plastic badge with my name printed in half-broken ink. I didn't throw it away. I didn't keep it. I opened the drawer of my desk, dropped it in, and shut it softly. Then I pulled out a yellow Post-it, scribbled 7 words. "You told me I don't belong. Let's see how well you survive without my shadow holding your walls up. I folded it once, tucked it inside the exit strategy folder. That night, for the first time in weeks, I didn't check my email before bed. And somehow, sleep came easier than it had any right to. I wasn't invited to the next meeting either. I showed up anyway. I didn't knock when I walked into the strategy meeting. I didn't need to. They all looked up, startled but silent, like they'd seen a ghost step through the doorway in full daylight. I didn't stay long, just long enough to drop a revised financial outline on the table, the same one Valora had been butchering for weeks. I turned and left before anyone found their voice. Later that afternoon, I stopped by my father's house to drop off a tax document he'd forgotten to sign. It was supposed to be a quick exchange, nothing more than a handoff at the door. He waved me in with a distracted grunt, already walking toward the den. That was Clyde, never cruel, never kind, just absent in all the ways that mattered. On my way through the entry hall, I spotted it sitting neatly on the console table below the framed photo of him and Valora at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The Omega watch. Black dial, leather band, vintage-styled clasp. I had saved for 8 months to buy that watch. It wasn't the price that made it valuable. It was what it meant, or what I thought it meant. Clyde glanced back and said casually, "Your sister got me that a while back. Thoughtful, huh?" I didn't correct him. I didn't say a word. I just nodded, offered a tight smile, and looked away before the sting could crawl too far up my face. My throat burned, but my voice held. That kind of discipline becomes muscle memory after a while. I didn't stay for coffee. I left before he remembered I was still in the room. Driving home, I let the heater run too high, hoping the dry air would suck out the weight in my chest. But my mind didn't cooperate. It wandered back, stubborn as ever. 8 years ago, I had given him that watch the week I received my first bonus as assistant controller. He'd missed an important flight a few days earlier, something about a busted clasp and a dead battery. I remembered wrapping the box myself, handwriting the tag. "So you're never late for your life." His reaction back then? A distracted thanks, maybe a half smile. He'd set it aside while answering an email about a board seat he was angling for. I told myself he was just tired, that he appreciated it in his own quiet way. But sitting there in traffic, all I could think was, did he ever even remember I gave it to him? I didn't want an answer. When I got back to my apartment, I kicked off my boots, dropped my bag, and went straight to the kitchen for a glass of water. My phone buzzed twice. Unknown number, then a text. It was from Rosa. I hadn't heard from her since she retired 3 years ago. She used to keep the house running while we all lived under one roof. Rosa was more than staff. She was the one who slipped me aspirin when I had cramps, and Valora was out getting her nails done. The one who saw things no one else thought she noticed. Her message was simple. A voice note. I sat down before I pressed play. "Honey," she whispered, voice raspy, "I remember Mr. Rhodes signing that paper for you. The inheritance one. Before he passed. Your mother. She told me to keep it quiet. I shouldn't have, but I thought you'd want to know." I stared at the screen, not breathing. She meant the will, the original one. The version I found hidden in a folder 2 weeks ago. The one that named me as having 40% ownership. Unencumbered. Legally binding. Supposedly. But it had never been filed. The family lawyer claimed it was superseded. That changes had been made. No explanation. Just smooth deflection. That night, Rosa was referring to, it had to be right after the funeral. I remembered that evening. The air thick with grief and obligation. I'd gone to bed early. My mother had stayed in the study alone, said she needed to organize things. No one questioned her. She handled the estate, always had. We let her, we trusted her. Now I wondered if she'd spent that night doing more than organizing. Maybe she'd buried the truth in a locked drawer. Maybe she'd always planned to rewrite the ending before anyone else could read it. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even call Rosa back. Instead, I opened the fireproof safe in my closet. Inside, Beneath a layer of legal files and encrypted backups was my certified copy of the original will. I took it out and laid it flat on the dining table. Next to it, I placed a small USB drive. On it, Rosa's voicemail, saved and backed up. Then, from the kitchen drawer, I retrieved the gala brochure, the one with Valora's speech, the one where she'd been credited for my entire fiscal recovery plan. Her name, my numbers, her face, my strategy. I slipped it under the will and the drive. I wasn't gathering mementos. I was building a case. I didn't need a stage. I didn't need applause. I just needed the truth to be documented before someone tried to set it on fire. They thought I was collecting dust. I was constructing the fuse. And when someone steals from you long enough, you stop asking for it back. You start planning how to take the whole room. I didn't write back to her reply. I submitted my own. By the time Marjorie finally responded to my pointed little email, her tone was polished into something that read like concern, but felt like control. Let's clarify everything together, dear. I'm sure it's all a misunderstanding. I didn't bite. I had no interest in clarity served with condescension. Instead, I spread both versions of the will out on my kitchen table that Friday morning, sunlight leaking through the blinds and onto Clyde's familiar, stoic signature. The original, the one I found tucked inside Grandpa's storage bin, was clear and clean. 40% ownership to Magnus Rhodes. Unencumbered. The updated version filed through the family's estate attorney had me missing completely. It was as if I had never existed. I held both side by side. No legal jargon could explain it away. No oversight could justify the precision in my erasure. That was no accident. The night after Grandpa's funeral came back to me with sharp edges. We'd all gone quiet after the reception, that long afternoon of polite condolences and stiff hands on shoulders. I remember Marjorie announcing she needed space, saying, "I'll be in the study. Please don't disturb me." The drawer where she kept estate records had always been locked. Back then, it didn't occur to me to question why. Clyde hadn't asked either. He never did. Whatever Marjorie declared became family protocol. Now I saw it for what it was, a controlled edit of legacy, made behind a closed door while everyone else was still grieving. By early afternoon, I called the estate attorney, posing as if I just wanted clarification on a minor tax clause. He was too polite to sense danger. "I've sent over the official summary," he said. "Let me know if anything looks off. Though, do note the phrasing, your portion is marked as pending under performance-based review." I blinked. "Performance-based review?" I repeated. "Yes. It's language your mother requested. Kind of a flexible clause. Keeps things fair. That word again. I ended the call without asking more. I'd already learned everything I needed. Suspended. My inheritance wasn't gone. It was pending performance, as if my bloodline had a probationary period. I went digging. In the back of my storage cabinet was an old tax folder dated the year Grandpa passed. Slipped inside was a post-it, Marjorie's handwriting looped in neat cursive. Update with family priorities first. It was clipped to a printed draft of the will, the same draft I had now in my hand. I sat back in my chair, letting the weight of it land. Not just betrayal, but calculation. This wasn't a family error. It was a strategy. I didn't call her. I didn't storm in. I wrote an email, not frantic, not demanding. Found the original grandfather clause while sorting old files. Will let you know if I find any inconsistencies. That was it. No exclamation points, no emotion, just implication wrapped in grammar sharp enough to draw blood. Then I started the real work. I indexed every document I had ever been cut from. Financial reports where my signature disappeared. Organizational charts where my title shifted to a dotted line. Photos from press events where it had been cropped out just enough to keep the symmetry, but lose the person. Every piece told a story. Every omission had a timestamp. They thought it'd crumble. They thought it'd spiral or beg. But they forgot something critical. You don't push out the person who built the firewall. You just teach her where to dig. I renamed the drive. Again. This time, undeniable. Because the difference between being forgotten and being erased is that the latter comes with evidence, and I was done forgetting. They didn't just ignore the warning, they took it as a dare. And now, it's my turn. I walked into the quarterly review meeting without fanfarino greeting. No badge, no name placard, just me and my steps. Steady, unbothered. No one stopped me, no one asked who I was. Either they truly believed I wouldn't come back, or they were hoping I'd be too humiliated to show my face. Both options revealed everything I needed to know. I chose a seat in the back, near the wall right behind the CFO's assistant. The same seat they used to put the interns in. That symbolic corner of the room where eyes don't wander, where voices stay quiet. But I didn't flinch. Valora stood at the front, owning the room like she'd been born in it. Her voice carried the smooth charm of a practiced politician, rehearsed, polished, pleasant. She smiled toward the webcam, where investors dialed in from across the globe, gesturing at the bright screen behind her. The image was clean, professional, a sleek slideshow of Vandian's so-called next chapter. The main slide read, Strategic Investment, Innovation Through Leadership. And then came the Photo new 3D printer line. Flagship equipment we couldn't even dream of affording half a year ago. Yet, somehow, here it was, already installed and functioning. In large part, Valora said, clasping her hands together like a seasoned keynote speaker, this expansion was made possible through a generous contribution I secured from a key stakeholder relationship. Their belief in our future allowed us to pivot quickly and elevate our capabilities. The words hung in the air like perfume. Beautiful, impressive, and completely false. Because I knew the truth. That stakeholder relationship she mentioned? That was me. The funding for that printer came from an emergency operations reserve, my private LLC. A quiet contribution I never even filed for reimbursement, because at the time, they needed it more than I needed credit. And Valora? She had rewritten the script, stamped her name on the invoice, claimed the glory with zero hesitation. Not a glance in my direction, not even a pause. I didn't interrupt. I didn't raise my hand. I simply watched, observed, took mental notes, the kind that get filed, not forgotten. Because at the bottom right of that slide, the one with the printer photo, I spotted something most wouldn't notice. A faded string of numbers embedded in the corner. A procurement code I had memorized long ago. The same one that traced back to my bank account. The meeting ended with polite applause. Some stayed behind for polite chatter, others packed up fast. When the head of procurement began sliding his tablet into a briefcase, I walked up. Calm, unshaken. I handed him a paper copy of the original invoice. It was printed, highlighted, noted. On top was a single yellow sticky note. Incorrect recipient listed in internal report. For correction. That was all. No confrontation, no accusation. Just the facts. He looked at the paper like it was radioactive, like he could feel the ripple this could cause, but hadn't yet done the math on how far it would spread. I didn't stay long enough for him to finish the equation. Back home, I replayed the live stream of the meeting slowly, frame by frame. I zoomed in on the slide again, and there it was. Lower corner, nearly hidden in red. Draft 1, A-arch, revised, crossed out. Replaced by Valora, final. They didn't even bother deleting the version history. Just renamed it and called it their own. I took a screenshot. Dragged it into a digital folder I'd quietly been building for months. I called it Exit Strategy. Then I opened a new document. Legal letterhead, formal formatting, precision language. I addressed it not to the board, not to Valora, but directly to Vanden's legal counsel. In the letter, I detailed invoice discrepancies, procurement misattributions, reputational risks tied to inaccurate crediting of financial contributions. I never once raised my voice, but every word carried weight. At the bottom, I ended with a sentence as sharp as a scalpel. Please treat this as a request for internal clarification prior to further escalation. And I signed it, plainly. Magnus Rhodes, CPA, shareholder. Then I waited. One day, then two, then three. No reply. No call. No acknowledgement. Not even a read receipt. What did arrive was a press release complete with stock photos and marketing jargon. Legacy led by Vision. Vandian's next chapter. Authored by Valora, of course. My name? Absent. Again. I didn't slam my laptop. I didn't scream or curse. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold water, and drank it slowly. The sound of each swallow was louder than Valoris' entire speech in my mind. They thought their silence would shrink me. They didn't know silence could cut sharper than noise. And as I looked at the screen, at the words she borrowed, and the empire she thought she built, I said it aloud, just once, into the quiet of my apartment. They were warned. Now they'll pay the cost of pretending I was never here. The more they erased me, the louder the paper trail screamed. The email came from a burner domain, but I knew the formatting Vanden used a very specific contract template. Whoever sent it had access to internal systems. The document was attached, unsigned, but embedded metadata showed it had already been finalized and filed. I scrolled to the last page. There, in black and white, authorized signatory family shareholder approval. The line that had once included my name, gone, replaced with Valoris. The co-signature? Quillen's initials, typed in fast, the way you do when you think no one will ever check. I didn't feel shocked. That had expired months ago. What I felt now was precision. I printed the document, 3 copies, stapled, sealed them into a manila envelope. This time, I wasn't drafting polite reminders or carefully worded clarifications. I wasn't submitting emails into the abyss of legal's inbox. This time, I was walking it in myself. I arrived at headquarters just before lunch, just early enough to catch the staff before they disappeared into the cafeteria. I didn't ask for a meeting. I didn't check in with reception. I knew the building. I helped plan its reorg. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor, walked straight into the finance suite, and placed the envelope on the CFO's desk. He wasn't there. No one stopped me. Inside the packet, the contract draft, the inheritance clause that Marjorie had forgotten, and a neatly typed letter requesting immediate forensic reconciliation of all financial amendments involving my name. I wrote only one sentence in ink at the bottom. This isn't a threat. It's a courtesy. Then I left. On the way down, I stopped at the server console outside the compliance room. Tried to log in. Denied. I dialed the internal extension for data systems. The voice that answered was a young man. I didn't know him. "I'm trying to access the ledger archive," I said calmly. He paused. Your profile's no longer valid. Finance deactivated it during the tier restructure last month." "Did they?" I said, more a statement than a question. They had locked me out of the system I designed. What they didn't realize was, I had built the firewall, but I also knew where the emergency exits were hidden. That night, I went home, pulled out a separate drive I hadn't touched in over a year. It held offline backups, vendor histories, reconciliation reports I had kept for my own sanity during chaotic quarters. I knew how to cross-compare purchase orders, track overpayments, decode soft-coded expense fields. Within 2 hours, I had flagged 2 vendor transactions, double entries, each for 70 grand, labeled as branding deployment. But they weren't tied to any campaign I recognized. I printed those too. Valoris' new public image came with a price, and it looked like they'd paid for it using the kind of budget magic that never survives audit daylight. The next morning, I returned. This time, I didn't walk into finance. I walked into legal. The firm had merged with Vanden's external counsel last year. I handed the envelope to the partner directly. His name was Clay. He wore expensive glasses and a wedding ring he hadn't cleaned since 2019. "I'd like this reviewed under Section 5B of Internal Shareholder Protections," I said, calmly. He looked at the seal. "We weren't notified of any changes." "No," I said, "you weren't." And I left. That evening, I sat on the couch, lights off, phone in hand. It rang just past 9. Kilon. I didn't answer the first time. On the second ring, I picked up. It wasn't me, he started, breathless. Valora had legal pre-clearance. She said it was just temporary. The clause was just to streamline things. I didn't interrupt. I didn't know she removed you from the vendor list, he added. I swear. You didn't know because you didn't care, I replied. You never do. He exhaled. What do you want, Magnus? For a moment, I stared out the window at the streetlights casting amber shadows on the pavement. I wanted the truth, I said, my voice steady. Now I'll settle for evidence. I hung up. By the time they realized I wasn't bluffing, the first audit request had already been submitted, and it wasn't coming from me. They thought it'd crumble, but now they're the ones asking who else they've told. The message came through at 8:17 a.m., tucked between two promotional emails about discounted office chairs and a spammy real estate pitch. A forward from Mia Chen, a former marketing assistant who left Van Den last quarter. Subject line, "You didn't get this from me." There was no text in the body, just a single screenshot. At first glance, it looked like any internal Slack conversation. Then I saw the names Valora and a senior executive, Nolan Fields. And the words, "Just wait. She always breaks when she's not seen. Let her feel invisible long enough. She'll quit herself. No ambiguity. No room for misinterpretation." It was about me. My sister, me own blood-strategizing psychological erasure, with the elegance of someone commenting on weather patterns. I stared at the screen, letting the glow sting my eyes. Then I opened my notebook, flipped to the last clean page, and wrote in block letters, "Not quitting. Not quiet." The paper wrinkled under my grip. An hour later, I was in my apartment's home office when my old CPA, Jerry, called. "Magnus," he said after a beat too long, "we need to talk. There's a new credit line, it's under your LLC." My stomach didn't drop. It compressed like air being forced out of a sealed chamber. He walked me through it. A $300,000 loan, tagged as support for a Texas expansion project. My name was listed as the silent co-backer. The signature attached to the application, digitized. "Did you authorize this?" he asked. "I didn't even know it existed," I said. Jerry sighed. "Then we have a problem, not you. We." That was something. I scheduled an appointment at the bank the same afternoon. I walked in with a binder, not a purse. The woman at the front desk asked if I needed a business account manager. I nodded and was led to a glass-walled room where a man in a too-tight tie greeted me like I was an interruption, not a client. "Loan ID 6712223, I said. "I need the application documents." He blinked. "You're Ms. Rhodes?" "I am." 20 minutes later, the documents were on the table. 3 pages. Digital approvals. Attached was a trail of internal emails between Van Den's financial liaison and their outsourced funding agent. I skimmed until I reached Quillan's name. She won't push back. She never does. That was all he wrote. 3 lines above it, Valora's tone was more polished. "Well, loop Magnus in after it's finalized. She has a history of slowing processes." Slowing processes? That's what they called cross-checking legal exposure now? I signed a records release form, collected printed copies of every document, and walked out. At home, I didn't sit down. I moved. Each file got scanned, encrypted, and uploaded into my private legal portal under a new folder, Phase 1 Liability Discovery. Then, I drafted a legal notice to the bank. Not aggressive, just surgical. I did not authorize the loan. My signature is falsified. I am formally requesting forensic verification of all documents bearing my name in this matter. I copied Vanden's board, every last one. That night, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it buzz 4 times before I answered. Valora's voice came through tight, clipped, too careful. "Magnus." I didn't let her finish. "You knew." Click. No yelling. No demand. Just that. I didn't need a confrontation. I already had proof. Before I turned in for the night, I called my lawyer, authorized a full audit, uploaded every screenshot, every invoice, every name. I wasn't documenting a grievance. I was building a wall they couldn't climb over or talk their way around. My journal entry that night was brief. They spent years trying to keep me small. This isn't about being seen anymore. It's about making sure they can't hide. The more they tried to keep me quiet, the more I realized silence was their only shield. And I had just broken it. I didn't return their calls. But the audit returned their silence with questions they couldn't bury. It started with a letter from my attorney, 3 pages, tightly worded, and stamped with the firm's seal. The subject line alone was enough to make most boards sweat. Formal notice of forensic inquiry initiated by silent stakeholder. By the end of the week, Van Dien's legal team had no choice but to acknowledge receipt. And under mounting pressure from external investors, the board greenlit a full forensic audit. Not a soft internal review, not some PR sweep. A real one with scope, authority, and no filters. The request included everything: financial transfers, historical asset reallocations, silent partner liabilities, especially those linked to my name or LLC. I didn't smile when I got the confirmation. I just exhaled. Finally, I powered down my phone. For 2 days, I let it all sit. No texts, no inbox refresh, no calls. Silence wasn't unfamiliar. It lived in it long enough. But this time, it was intentional. Strategic. When I turned my phone back on, the screen lit up like a warning flare. 89 missed calls. Dozens of texts. Half a dozen voicemails. Almost all from Valora and Quilon. One text said, "Please talk to us before this spreads." Another just said, "You don't have to do this. It's still family." I played one voicemail. Valora's voice cracked before she even said my name. "Magnus, I don't know how this got so far. You should have just talked to us." Talk to them? I'd been talking for years. They just weren't listening. I deleted the voicemail and opened my laptop. The Van Dien website had been updated. I navigated straight to the About Us page. There was Clyde, Marjorie, Valora, of course, and a new name-some young strategist out of Chicago. Creative strategy officer. I clicked the bio. Mine used to be there, right between Marjorie and Valora, the original architect of the finance model that saved us during the 2019 vendor collapse. Now, erased. Not just my bio, my photo, my title, any trace of me. At the bottom of the page, in small font, established by 3 generations of visionary leadership. I laughed, not out of humor, but relief. They had built their narrative, fully. Now the audit would build mine. 3 days later, I met with my legal team and Daniel's acquisition group in a quiet conference room. No windows, just binders, laptops, evidence. We sat around the table and went line by line. Duplicate payments to a boutique branding agency. 0 documentation. $140,000 unaccounted for. 2 expansion projects reported as internally financed that were actually fronted by falsified credit from my LLC without my signature. Liabilities hidden under creative reinvestment. And the best part? It was all in their handwriting, their emails, their version history. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lean in. I let the facts speak louder than anything had said before. Clay, one of the senior attorneys, looked over at me and asked quietly, "Is there anything else you want to add?" I slid one last document across the table. The original clause from Grandpa Will, still valid, still binding. "No," I said. "That's all." That evening, I sat by my window, feet tucked under me, sipping a glass of iced tea I'd forgotten in the freezer long enough for it to turn slushy. Then I wrote my final memo. Not to Van Dien, not to Valora, not to the board. I sent it to legal, marked confidential. Subject line, final summary, no further action required. Body. Let this conclude what never should have needed proving. I closed the exit strategy folder for the last time and moved it to archive. I powered off my phone again, not because I was tired of them calling, but because I didn't need to hear their panic anymore. I had peace now. The truth didn't need me to scream. It just needed me to stop hiding, and now they couldn't look away. I didn't return their calls, but the audit returned their silence with questions they couldn't bury. The report arrived by courier, not email. Thick, spiral-bound, and sealed in a nondescript white envelope, no logos, no labels. Just my name typed in clean black font. Inside, the findings were everything I had suspected, and worse. Unauthorized use of silent shareholder signatures, disbursements with no vendor trail, asset movement that didn't match board minutes. No criminal charges were filed. Of course not. That would have meant dragging the family name through public mud, something investors hated more than the truth. But Valora was asked to step aside from all public-facing roles. Quilon announced a temporary sabbatical to recalibrate priorities. The firm's internal ethics council had issued recommendations for restructuring. Publicly, they called it refining the culture. Internally, they called it damage control. I called it what it was: accountability. I didn't send out a statement. I didn't take interviews. I didn't post a victory-laced paragraph on LinkedIn. I read the report, closed it, filed it in a drawer marked final. That same afternoon, I received an email from Marjorie. No subject line, no formal greeting, just one sentence. "Can we meet no lawyers?" I didn't respond. I printed it, slipped it into a new folder labeled Aftermath, and returned to my cup of tea. There was no pleasure in ignoring her, but no pain either, just the understanding that we had arrived at different destinations, and hers had a door I wasn't interested in walking back through. Clyde never called, not during the audit, not after, not when I was erased from the company website, not when the press speculated about internal disputes at Vanden. I wondered for a moment whether his silence was a form of pride or guilt, whether he had chosen not to speak because he didn't know what to say, or because he knew exactly what he'd done. I didn't chase the answer. That, too, was part of the healing. A week later, a package arrived on my doorstep. No return address. Just my name and handwriting I'd recognize anywhere. Inside, carefully wrapped, was the photo frame that used to sit in the Vanden lobby. The one with all 5 of us, Clyde, Marjorie, Valora, Quilon, and me standing in front of the original warehouse. The glass was cracked, a clean fracture running diagonally through my face. I didn't hang it. I didn't fix it. I slid it into a drawer. No drama, no fury, just one more thing that didn't need a spotlight to hold meaning. I wasn't part of that photo anymore. Not really, but I still existed outside its frame. The following Saturday, I walked through downtown Spokane with a coffee in hand, not on my way to a boardroom, but to meet Claire, a friend I hadn't made time for in years. We were having brunch, eggs Benedict and gossip, not spreadsheets and silence. I didn't bring my laptop. I didn't check my phone. And I didn't mention the company. She didn't ask. That was the gift. As we talked, I realized I didn't need Vanden's recognition to feel anchored. They had erased me from the company, but I had reclaimed my name in a place they couldn't touch myself. That night, I logged out of my encrypted archive for the last time. Not because I was finished preparing, but because I was no longer preparing to fight. Sometimes resolution isn't found in a courtroom. It's found in an empty inbox, a voicemail you never play again, a photo you choose not to display, and a voice, your own, that no longer needs permission to speak.